Breaking right now, a senior U.S. military source telling Fox we are under attack in Iraq right now from Iran. The Defense Department confirming tonight that Iran launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against U.S. military forces in Iraq. They launched these missiles around 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. You're looking at pictures that have come into us from Iranian state TV. They targeted at least 2 military bases there. Good evening, everyone. I am Trish Regan. Again, all of this breaking right now. A military source telling us the U.S. is under attack by Iranians in Iraq. One of the military bases is in Erbil, which is in northern Iraq. The other is al-Assad in western Iraq. I should point out that the President Trump, went to al-Assad back in December of 2018 and met with our troops there. The Pentagon says, and I quote, "We will take all necessary measures to protect and defend U.S. personnel, partners, and allies in the region." The White House telling us that the President has been briefed. He is monitoring the situation closely, and we are just learning that he may address the nation tonight. So we may be hearing from President Trump about this attack tonight. Do not forget that Iran had promised historic revenge. I quote, historic revenge, of course, for the killing of General Soleimani, who the U.S. cites as someone who has murdered as many as 600 Americans and had been planning additional attacks in the Middle East on Americans overseas, and was responsible for the attacks on the U.S. embassy there in Baghdad. Joining me right now with reaction to all of it, former Bush 43 Deputy Defense Undersecretary, former Delta Force member, retired Lieutenant General William Boykin, and by phone, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Trump, K.T. McFarland. It's good to have you here, both of you. General, I will start with you. What is your sense of what the Iranians have done? They promised a historic revenge. When you hear about 12 ballistic missiles being launched from Iran into Iraq, targeting U.S. bases there, what is your response to that?
Well, I think up to this point, you have to say that if they're planning historic revenge, there's more to come. There has to be, because I think this was a relatively weak response, and I think we will see some more. But I think that
I want to jump in and just share a little bit of some good news. We're getting some sourcing that's coming through to Fox, sources saying that there is no talk of casualties, that there are no casualties expected from this. And these are early reports. Again, I want to caution everyone, early reports of no casualties. Now, General, we know that 5,200 troops, U.S. troops, were there in Iraq. We know that thousands were sent over the weekend to help fortify those bases. So again, just an early report, but certainly encouraging, sir.
Yeah, it is encouraging. And again, I think it's a weak response. It's there has to be more to come, and I think we'll see more. But I don't know that it will be any more significant than this. Listen, I think that what you see here is the radical elements of the Supreme Council have prevailed here and forced this military response as opposed to a more covert response. And now I think they're going to live to regret it, because Mr. Trump has, I think he's made very clear that this will not be proportionate in terms of his response to this. Stand by, there is more to come.
What do you mean, more to come?
I think you're going to see an American response to this thing that will not be proportionate. I don't want to speculate on what the targets will be, but I think you're going to see not only a military response, but an economic response, and potentially other elements of national power will be used in response to this.
K.T. McFarland, you know the president very well. You served under him. Do you think he will respond that aggressively to this, even if we get reports that there are no casualties?
I think President Trump has been looking for a way to take America's engagement in the Middle East and change it. We have oil now because of Trump's actions. We are self-sufficient in energy, oil, and natural gas. We are, in fact, the world's largest exporters of both. We no longer need what the Middle East is selling. And as Trump has said, let somebody else fight over this piece of long, blood-stained land. I think if what we're seeing now, and General Boykin may be right. He may be right that more is to come. But if their response is to attack a couple of U.S. bases, chances are we have the capability, certainly, of shooting down those. And we have taken action in the last 5 days to harden those areas to make sure that there are not casualties. And if this turns out that this is their action and there are no American casualties, then I think the Iranians, if that's good enough for their national pride, then I think we're in a very different position. You know, Trump kept saying throughout in his statement after the killing of Soleimani was, we want peace. We don't want war. We want you back to the negotiating table. We want a relationship with you, but we want to renegotiate things. The Iranian general, very interestingly, yesterday afternoon, the Iranian general who's the aide to the supreme leader, he said, you've made your strike, we will have a proportionate response, and then the cycle is finished. So I'm looking at that and saying, you know, normally everybody threatens everything in retaliation, but the Iranians have said, we are going to retaliate, we are going to do it proportionately, and that's the end of it.
So in other words, in your view, that this could be some kind of closure, that they're saving themselves in terms of their national pride, they needed to do something, but maybe they got the message. Hey, maybe they got the message, because this is a guy that, you know, by the way, a lot of Iranian people didn't like. Let's not forget that. I mean, this is a guy who was a bad guy and you know, responsible for taking out, per the Reuters reporting, 1,500 individuals that opposed him there in Iran, KT. So, you know, so in some ways, maybe this could be an opportunity for them to recognize, yeah, there is a new sheriff in town. It's no longer President Obama. It's not President Carter. It's not, you know, former Secretary of State Clinton. We're not going to just sit by and allow our U.S. embassy to be attacked. There is going to be retaliation. And once they know that, they know the rules of the road, right?
Well, and I also think, Trish, you and I have talked about this before, the Iranian economy is in dire shape. And what is Iran going to do? They can't really blockade the Gulf, the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz, because they'll lose as much as anybody. In fact, it will probably be better for American oil exports if Iranian oil and Arab oil is taken off the market.
As we say all this, I just want to report we're getting something in from Iranian State TV right now. And General Boykin, I'll go back to you. Iranian State TV reporting that there has been a second round of attacks that's now happening against these U.S. bases. So as you said, you anticipated that this was just the beginning. Iranian State TV now confirming a second round of attacks against U.S. bases. It could be a long night.
Yeah, let me go back to what KT said, and I hope that she is right, because she is the expert. I hope she is right, and if we could close this whole thing out now and everybody would go home satisfied that they had done their best. But let me also say that I am concerned about this whole issue of cultural targets. The Iranian people, as KT said, have already shown that they are not happy with their government. They've risen up against their government. 1,500 of them have been killed by the thugs that worked for Soleimani, 1,500 or more. So the last thing we need to do is unite these people by hitting cultural sites that would actually work against us.
It looks like that's off the table. I think that what the president was trying to convey, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'll use Mike Pompeo's, because he said on the weekend shows that effectively the president was trying to say, enough with the proxy wars. You know what? You know, this proxy war stuff has got to stop, because at some point you've got to realize that you can be hit within the boundaries of Iran itself. In other words, there are consequences. And I think that message certainly, you know, has been heard. What they do with it, of course, General, is the big question right now.
No, I agree with you, but look, we'll see what happens with these this latest round of missiles that have been fired, and what else they do. I'm not sure that it's going to be confined to just firing a few missiles. I think we may see some terrorist acts potentially directed at Israel.
Yeah.
Well, you agree with that, KT?
Yeah, I mean, I think Israel's a likely target. Iran, Hezbollah forces, whether it's something in Lebanon, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Iraq, as we're now seeing. But I think, you know, if you look at where the mullahs were, say, a week ago, they had people in the streets. Their inflation, in some estimates, is running at 70%. Unemployment is running probably at 40%. They're not getting their one export, which is oil. They're not getting it to market. And if the
no, their economy's suffering for sure.
Look, I think that President Trump ought to keep his mouth shut. Don't try to taunt them into, my missiles are bigger than your missiles, or we're going to attack you harder than. Be quiet about it. His actions have now spoken for him.
Well, and that's, KT, that's assuming that, it's not that long a night. That's assuming that there are no casualties. I spoke with a source earlier by telephone tonight who told me that there was a lot of medical personnel that was being moved into Syria, U.S. medical personnel, specifically general surgeons. In other words, we are prepared for something that could be pretty catastrophic. But nonetheless, I imagine those are preparations, General, that you always take and you have to be ready for, but nonetheless alarming to think that we need that much in the way of medical personnel being sent to Syria right now, potentially to be taking in people that have been harmed. Yeah,
absolutely agree. Good preparations.
Good preparations are critical in all of this. KT, we sent so many thousands of troops overseas over the weekend. What would those troops be doing? What would they be charged with as they're trying to fortify these bases?
Well, they're trying to fortify the bases. Presumably, we still control the air, so we would have the capability of shooting down missiles. And if there are any on-site terrorist attacks, then I think our people are ready. But, I just keep thinking that Trump, just be patient about this, and maybe this is it. If this is it, we're in a very good position to continue to squeeze the Iranians. They've got their macho pride back, and then we can say, let's turn a new chapter. If General Boykin is right, that it's going to be other things as well, and if American citizens and American military personnel are fatalities, then I think we're talking about a very different thing. But the Iranian leaders know this. I mean, they have had a real wake-up call in the last week. So I think that they're looking for kind of an exit ramp as well.
Look, I would argue that I agree. I think that they're scared. I think that they did not anticipate that the president would lash out so aggressively, that they would go and take General Soleimani, because, there's always been sort of the way we do things, right? And if you think about recent history, and certainly going back to Barack Obama, I mean, hey, we were piling cash into airplanes in the middle of the night, full well knowing, we were looking at the sound earlier today from John Kerry in 2016, in which he said, yes, some of that money is going to go to terror organizations. In other words, we knew that some of that money would fund death and terror, and nonetheless, we did the deal anyway. They're the ones that blew that one up. They violated the deal. The president really didn't have a choice other than to tear it up. They then struck back with a U.S. drone attack, attacking a U.S. drone, and as well as the oil fields. General Boykin, I think, they made their position pretty loud and clear. The president had told them all along, over and over and over again, hey guys, I'm here, I'm willing to talk, I will negotiate it with you. He said this multiple times, and yet they responded with an attack on a U.S. drone. I mean, at what point do we say, okay, you guys got to get the hint here, we mean business?
Yeah, let me also remind your audience that the Iran deal was signed in 2015. In 2016, January of 2016, they had took 2 American patrol boats off the coast of Iran. And not only did they take them, but they humiliated our soldiers, our sailors there in those patrol boats. So Iran has never modified its behavior as a result of that Iran deal. And as you just said, we gave them $150 billion, some of which John Kerry acknowledged was going to terrorist organizations. So it is a different landscape now. It's a different commander-in-chief, a different approach to the Iranian foreign policy. And what I think you're going to see, I think the first thing you're going to see is you're going to see an increase in the sanctions. I think the president has made very clear that he's ready to go to the next level of sanctions.
And with Iraq as well.
And then we'll see what happens. Yeah, and with Iraq as well.
So sanction them. If you can quarantine them off from the world, I mean, we have sanctioned them, and we've sanctioned them a lot in Iran, and I think that they've gotten the message to a certain extent. But, you know, the problem, General, sometimes with sanctions, and I actually like sanctions, especially as an economic and business reporter, I think that they can have a pretty profound effect on behavior. But nonetheless, you've got the people that are really suffering. One hopes that the people sort of rise up, take the bull by the horns, and say, okay, enough with this poor leadership that's caused so much economic struggle for us. You know, if you've got a leadership regime such as this one in Iran that's trying to suppress its people by cutting off the internet, cutting off the outside world, killing, assassinating 1,500 dissidents, then it makes it more challenging for the people to rise up. So you continue those economic sanctions, but aren't those hurting the people? They're not actually hurting the leaders themselves. And I think what we just demonstrated is we have a new way, right, to go after those leaders pretty strategically, pretty surgically.
Yeah, keep in mind, I'm sorry.
General first and then over to KT.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so keep in mind that probably the primary reason that the people have not been able to drive their own government out of power is because of the IRGC, because of Soleimani. He is the one that has controlled all the landscape there. He's controlled the military, but he's also controlled the weapons, and he's controlled major sectors of the economy, and that's why the people have nothing to rise up with except their own courage.
Yeah, for sure. Joining me right now, I want to jump in. Stay with me, General, and KT, but I want to bring into the conversation again General Boykin and just ask you about, it's important that a president does take that into consideration. It would be wonderful if these reports hold true and that there are no U.S. casualties. But as KT was saying earlier, let's not forget about the influence of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah and Iran go hand in hand. Hezbollah is a terror organization that has been responsible for so many civilian deaths. And despite the Russian state media out tweeting today that Iran would not have civilian casualties, a tweet, by the way, that I should point out, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez foolishly liked because it's flat out wrong. Iran has been responsible via its surrogates, via Hezbollah, for many civilian casualties. How do we deal with the Iran sort of regime that's in power, that may be negotiating on the one hand, and then the terrorists that are backing him up, you know, in the other room?
Well, I think there's several things that we have to do. And by the way, remember that Iran created Hezbollah. It's not that they support them, it's that they created Hezbollah. And remember also that Hezbollah was the organization that blew up the Marine barracks in October of 1983. So they've killed more than civilians. They've gone after military targets as well. What do? I think these sanctions are killing them. I think they're crippling them. You said earlier they hurt the people as well. Well, that's one of the unfortunate problems with sanctions, but at the same time, we've got to squeeze these mullahs in the Supreme Council. So I think sanctions are important. We have a wide array of covert capabilities. I don't want to go into those, but we can support that opposition. We can support the people of Tehran. And let me just say, I was in Erbil in May, and I talked to a guy that has been in Tehran for over a decade. And he told me that the people there are so fed up with their government. And in fact, he said they would rise up against that government if they had the capabilities to do so. Yeah. So I think that
I've heard that as well from sources in Iran. I've definitely heard that echoed. And the danger, of course, in any situation like this is you unite the people and they rally together with, you know, horrible regime that has really worked to oppress them, but nonetheless they feel victimized. And so that's, I get it, that's a danger in a situation like that, and it's important to point out, and I appreciate you doing so.